Hiring the wrong property manager can cost you thousands, but hiring the right one, that can get your portfolio to run like a well-oiled machine. In this video, I'm going to share the top questions that you should ask when you are interviewing a property manager and what their answers mean for your future success. And the number one question that separates the amateurs from the pros is coming at the end.
Oh my God, I can't wait.
So make sure to stick around till then. For more strategies to optimize your portfolio, be sure to go get my Freedom Blueprint on my website, adriennegreen.com. It's packed with actionable tips to help you scale your portfolio smarter instead of harder. The link is in the podcast or video notes as well. If you have decided to hire a property manager, your goal is to maximize returns and minimize headaches with that property manager's help. But here's the thing, not all property managers are created equal. And with all the real estate investors I speak with, issues with property managers are probably the number one complaint that they have. A great property manager is amazing, and an awful property manager is a total waste of money. That's why today I'm going to give you a roadmap to vet property managers the right way so you can protect your investments and avoid the costly mistakes and headaches of working with a property manager that isn't worth it. I'm going to walk through 3 different key points of property management and dive into some questions that I think help evaluate how the property manager handles that key point and what the answers could mean that they may give you. First, let's talk about the tenant turnover and the leasing process. This is so important, and this is really where you can spend a lot of money or make a lot of money. So first, my first question I would ask in this regard is, how long is the downtime between tenants? And what I would love to have as an answer is 2 to 4 weeks, ideally. And a shorter downtime means that they are efficient at marketing and tenant placement, and longer downtime could signal disorganization or that they really don't have the investor's best interests at heart. Because, of course, when the property's sitting empty, you're not making any money, right? And so we really want to minimize that downtime so that we're maximizing the time you are getting rent, and we want them to recognize that and see what they do to minimize that downtime. Now, of course, there's going to be some seasonal variation in this, right? There's typically the spring, early summer market where downtime is going to be really short. And if you are cursed enough that you're having to find a tenant over the Thanksgiving or Christmas holidays, of course, it's going to be longer, and we want to understand that. And yet, in an ideal market with a lot of rental demand, what do they want as that downtime? And I want to see 2 to 4 weeks there, ideally. Another question to minimize downtime is, I want to know if they visit the property before the lease is over to plan for that make ready or that turnover that's going to need to happen. The ideal answer is that they are walking that rental about 2 weeks before the end of the lease so that they can see what work needs to be done, and they can make sure the handyman or the contractor has it in the calendar to come in as soon as that lease is up, the very next day, ideally, to start doing that work, right? Because handymen and contractors are not available at the drop of a hat. If the property manager isn't touring the property to see what work needs to happen until the tenant is out, well, now they're probably gonna have to wait a little bit of time for that handyman or contractor to get in there. Even if it is their own team, maybe they can get in a little faster, and yet it's pretty unlikely that if they're not in the property prior to the end of the lease, that they're getting those guys in to start doing that work right away. So I like it when they're touring a couple weeks before so they can plan and have the right people on the calendar to get in there as soon as the tenant is out, minimizing the downtime that it takes to get the unit ready and get another tenant in. My final question about tenant turnover is, I want to know, where do they list properties for rent? And I want to hear that they're listing it everywhere that it could be, right? A lot of property managers use systems that will automatically list it on places like Zillow, apartments.com, and a whole bunch of other websites. The things that they might have to do manually are Facebook Marketplace and the local MLS. Now, Facebook Marketplace, I definitely want to hear that they're taking the time and effort to list it on Facebook Marketplace. Yes, they're going to have to deal with a lot of those messages that we all love. Is this still available, right? And yet, I can tell you from my personal experience and from a lot of those I've worked with, while you get a lot of those random messages, it's also where you get tenants. That's where people are looking. So I want to hear that they're posting on Facebook Marketplace. And depending on the local market, they may or may not be using the local MLS as well. That's very market specific. The downside of them listing on the MLS is typically they're going to have to pay a real estate agent who's representing the tenant. And that by they paying it, I mean, you're going to pay it. And it may not be necessary. It just depends on the local market. So that's something where you'd want to ask, see, and maybe see what other investors in your local market are saying as well about if it's worth it to be listed on the MLS. Second point, maintenance and repairs. This is an area where costs can spiral if it's not handled well. And so we want to understand what the process is beforehand and make sure that what they do and what you're expecting is the same. One thing I always want to ask is if they handle maintenance requests in-house or if they use contractors. It's possible they do entirely in-house. It's possible they do entirely contractors. Often, or an ideal situation is if they've got a handyman that can handle simple tasks in-house. Usually that means they can get them fixed faster and you're going to have happier tenants. And then they also have access or a list of licensed contractors that they'll use for larger rehabs, repairs, turnovers, or things like that. That's what we see a lot of the time. And I like that mix personally because it's usually the mix of being the most efficient and cost effective. The property manager relies entirely on contractors that they subcontract with. It might be a little pricier because of just that dynamic. So that's something I would look at and ask about if they work exclusively with contractors. I would ask specifics about what do their typical bills be or what is their hourly rate that they're typically paying and compare that with the specific answers you get from other property managers. Another question we want to ask about rehabs and repairs is what's their typical markup on contractor repairs? I have seen that industry standard of about 10, maybe 15%. So if they are handling everything with a contractor and getting worked in, they're going to charge an extra 10 to 15% for their time and effort in doing that, which having handled contractors, I respect that it does take time and effort and that they deserve to be paid for their time. That's what I see as typical. If it was a lot more than that, it would be a red flag. If they weren't charging anything at all, that might be a bonus. And yet we want to explore, do they have a business model that works and how are they getting paid? Are they overcharging in something else? How would that affect you? So keep that in mind. Financial transparency is really a non-negotiable when you're hiring a property manager. They need to be able to show you what money they're spending. We need to understand and be on the same page for that. And you're seeing quickly and easily where your rent is coming in, what expenses are going out, and then the rest is coming to you.
That's just an interesting fact.
One of my first questions along this line is what property management technology are you using? The ideal answer is that they're using AppFolio, which is a really, I'd say, an industry standard, widely used, and provides a lot of transparency. So if they're using AppFolio, that's great. That's awesome. Moving on. If they give you an answer different than AppFolio, AppFolio can be expensive. So there are a couple situations where I would totally understand that. One is if they're like a new growing property manager and they just don't have a lot of doors yet. It's not uncommon for a property manager to start with a less expensive platform, realizing they'll switch to AppFolio once they kind of have enough bulk of properties that it's worth paying for. The second thing, if you're working with like a really boutique firm that stays small, then they may again, not have the bulk and not be worth paying for AppFolio for them. But I'd want to hear how they're providing that transparency and how they're letting you see how the numbers work. The second question I'd want to ask is, what does their financial reporting to owners look like? How often do you get a report? What's the format? How does that look like? Again, if they're using AppFolio, a lot of it'll be in there, but that might be something you want to drill down on so that, again, you understand that you're getting the numbers you want to have and you need to have in a timely fashion. And then the third question I really want to know, and this can vary widely, so it's really important to ask, is when and how are owner distributions handled? Are you getting paid in the same month when the tenant is paying? An example is often the tenant's rent is due at the first of the month. And then, of course, some tenants come in late. Sometimes, books have to be done. And then the owner's paid maybe around the 15th, right? That's a system I've seen. I've even seen it take as long as the owner not getting paid until the following month. So for example, your tenant pays rent on January 1st, expenses are paid, your property management fee is paid, and then you are getting the money that's left over on, let's say, February 10th or February 15th. I have seen some property managers take that long. It's your choice whether or not that works for you, but I would dig into that and see why and make sure that it does work for you if you go with a property manager that takes that long. If it's longer than 45 days after the rent is being paid that you're getting it, I have never heard of that, and I would be very, very concerned if that was the case. Now, the final section I want to talk about with interviewing a property manager is referrals and communication. You want to gauge their experience, their professionalism, and make sure that other people have been happy with their service as well. So one of the first questions I want to ask is if they can provide 2 to 3 references for other investors who are working with them as a property manager. The ideal answer is, of course, here are contacts who's worked with us for years. And what this means is willingness to provide references means that at least some people are happy with their service. Now, keep in mind, they could also have unhappy customers, and that's totally possible. And yet having a few happy people is great. And what I love is then you can really talk to these other investors and see what their pros and cons are, what they love about this property manager and what they maybe don't love. And so that way, again, you can see from what matters to you and for your portfolio if this property manager is a good fit. So when you do call those other investors, those references, I would ask what they love and then also what they don't love so that you can hear that side of the story as well. And if they love 100% of the things about the property manager, that worries me, right? If they don't have any constructive criticism, anything that they would change, that's highly unusual for an investor. I would also ask the question, in your opinion, what makes a landlord successful? I realize this is a little open-ended and less concrete, and yet it's a great question to really dig into their mind and see things from their perspective so you can see what they value and what they think works well, and also maybe get some wisdom, something you haven't thought about before for your own investing journey. What I want to hear is that they want good communication. That's something I definitely want in their answer, because if they want the landlord or the property owner to communicate well, that means that they value good communication and are probably going to do it themselves. So in their response, I definitely want to hear good communication. Another thing that would be good to hear is that the owner, the investor, maintains the property well, that they're willing to spend the money to keep it in good shape. I want a property manager that cares about that so that we can be on the same page, because I don't want to run a property that is a slum or is not great for tenants. And I want a property manager to also value that. And I think that's pretty universal. I don't advocate working with people who don't keep up their properties well. So that's something else I'd want to hear in the answer. And now, if you've stuck around to the end, here is my top tip and the number one question that can really show you a lot about this property manager. I would ask, can you share me an example of a time when something went wrong with a tenant or a property and how you handled it? Their response is going to reveal their problem-solving skills, their depth of experience in the industry, and if they haven't had something go wrong, then they haven't been a property manager for a long time or they're lying. So everybody's had something go wrong, and it's great to hear about how they handle it, how they communicated, how honest they were, if they're respectful of the other people as they communicate the situation, or if they speak disparagingly of the other people. That would be a red flag to me. And so I really think you can get a lot with this question. Can you share an example of a time something went wrong with a tenant or a property and how you handled it? Now, don't ask that question first thing. You want to kind of warm them up so you make sure you get an honest answer. That's a great question to ask in the last part of the interview. If you are an investor who's going to work with a property manager, the choice of that property manager is so important. And so I really hope that these questions help empower you to get great interviews as you're speaking to several property managers, and choose the one that's a great fit for you, who's really going to make it easy to manage these properties, make it very profitable for you to have these properties so you can continue to grow and scale. And if you want to scale your portfolio with great systems and less stress, make sure to download my Freedom Blueprint at adriennegreen.com. It's packed with actionable steps to help you achieve time and financial freedom with your investing portfolio. The link is in the notes below. And thank you so much for tuning in with us this week. And I look forward to seeing you next week for more tips about real estate investing.